First, the introduction on how I found this guy. I found this guy in 2024 with his video on the Atari version of Pac-Man and its more improved homebrew versions. After I watched his video, I thought that the video wasn't as good as the title and the thumbnail make it out to be. So I guess we were up to a bad start. I did watch his videos occasionally despite that, but I never subscribed. Sadly though, there is something that happened between me and his fans that was so unjust that I'm gonna call it out in this video while criticizing this guy's content. I wanna make this clear. I never wanted to hate on this Pojr guy, but since your fans treated me like worthless shit, I feel it's okay to make you responsible for the shit your fans do. Because of that, I won't be too nice when criticizing this guy. I'm done doing that. Now with that said, let's start.
The Neo Geo was an arcade machine where you can easily swap out games. The hardware was built more like a game console that took cartridges, which was advantageous over a typical arcade machine that only ran one game. The Neo Geo was also repackaged as one of the most expensive game consoles at $650 USD. In a shocking move, the Neo Geo was being re-released, this time at only $250. Unlike other console remakes though, there's something different about this one, something that surprised me. Let's take a look. What's going on? It's Pojr, coming at you with another video. We're going to be talking about the Neo Geo today. If that sounds like a fun time to you, hit that subscribe button right there. What kind of ice cream do you typically get from an ice cream parlor? We were talking about this on Discord last week. Let us know. discord.pojr.net.
These damn YouTubers are so sub-hungry and greedy about dumb numbers on a screen for some weird-ass reason. I think if you're trying to get a worldwide audience, some people might not be able to engage in this kind of conversation if they don't have an ice cream shop with the same ice cream brand, or if they have a different interest when it comes to going out to a food-based place. I know that what I'm about to say here on CensorTube, I mean YouTube, is kind of a no-no on YouTube comments or snowflake channels that block words, but these people are so boring. Always talking about video games or food. And you expect me to subscribe for this? I'm already ahead of them by trying my own kind of food. Just throwing that out there. I'm sure this question about food is just a tactic he uses to get promoted in the algorithm anyway.
Okay, let's get started. SNK was originally founded in 1973 as a stock company, but when the arcade video game market increased in popularity, they decided to get involved. One of their first arcade games was Ozma Wars, which was a typical shoot 'em up, but instead of lives, you have an energy meter that decreases when you get hit. Safari Race was another early SNK game where you have to avoid collisions. Both of these games were made in the late 70s, which explains the limited graphics. To expand their reach, SNK commissioned developers to release some other games like Commander and Vanguard. They also licensed some of their games to the company Century to release in the US. They had some success with their early arcade games like Akari Warriors, Vanguard, and Athena.
What about Atari? Most people know that Vanguard game because of the Atari 2600 port that SNK could not be bothered to include in their 50th anniversary collection, by the way.
Published games on other consoles like the SNES, Genesis, and TurboGrafx-16, but they decided to shift focus back to the arcade. In 1988, they came up with a revolutionary idea. Most arcade cabinets were only built to support one game. If you wanted to switch it out with a different game, you had to remove all the hardware inside and swap it with the desired board. There were arcade machines before it that allowed you to switch games much easier. Data East invented the Deco cassette system where you could switch out games easily.
I don't see what's so revolutionary about this. It was just the Fairchild Channel F idea all over again.
Neo Geo multi-video system. On the surface, it looks like a normal arcade machine, but when opening it up, we can see multiple cartridge ports where you can insert games. Switching out games was as simple as taking one cartridge out and putting in another one, unlike before where you had to swap everything. SNK advertised the Neo Geo as a 24-bit console, but in reality, it used an 8-bit Z80 coprocessor, which is the same one used in the Master System and ColecoVision. The CPU is a Motorola 68000, which was used in the Sega Genesis. But that's not the full story.
When looking at the games, we can see that the console was an absolute powerhouse. Cartridges could hold up to 330 megabits, which is equivalent to 41 megabytes. This is massive when you consider that the largest SNES game was only 6 megabytes. Later on, bank switching would allow cartridges to hold up to 90 megabytes. The Neo Geo was available in another form, the home console version called the AES. The hardware was identical to the arcade machine, which meant that you were getting the exact same experience at home. The cartridges, on the other hand, were not compatible with each other because the dimensions were not the same. Because the Neo Geo was extremely expensive to produce, it was originally only available to rent to commercial places like hotels and bars, but when there was some demand from consumers, they decided to make it publicly available for sale. At the price of $650, it was the most expensive console ever released. This might sound like overkill, but remember, you're literally getting the original arcade versions, not just ports. Other consoles tried to bring the arcade experience home, and some did a reasonably good job at this, but you were still getting a downgraded version of the original game. With the Neo Geo, you literally have the arcade hardware at your house. But what can the Neo Geo really do? Let's take a look at some of the games.
Let's start off with Metal Slug. It's a run-and-gun game. You can collect weapon upgrades, but they're only temporary. You die in one hit, but you can ride tanks that have their own life bars. You can throw grenades that are more powerful, but you only have a finite amount of them. You have 3 continues, or credits, but once you run out, you have to start over. The game reminds me of Contra, which is a huge compliment. The controls are decent, but could be better. You can shoot in 4 directions, including up and down, which is better than most games, but you can't aim diagonally unless you have the tank. The grenades can only be thrown left or right, which makes it hard to defeat certain enemies. The game really shows off what the Neo Geo can do. The graphics are colorful and well detailed, and the animations are smooth and realistic. The screen can sometimes get so busy, but the console doesn't seem to mind. A game like this would have never been possible on the SNES or Genesis without major sacrifices. It's no wonder this is one of the most popular Neo Geo games because it's fantastic. Metal Slug 2 made some noticeable improvements. You can now select between 4 characters, but they don't have any differences besides appearance. Certain hazards will transform you into something you don't want to be, like a mummy in Stage 2 for example. I like some of the different vehicles you can ride, like the aircraft in Stage 3. Like before, the vehicles will grant you a life bar, but the camel does not. It's still worth riding them though because you get a better weapon. Some of the bosses have a lot of creativity, like this one where you have to climb up to avoid getting eaten. The controls are exactly the same as the first game, where you can aim up and down, but not diagonally, and the grenades can only be thrown in front of you. This is unfortunate when fighting bosses that are directly above you. I like that the game isn't just a side-scroller, but there's stages where you have to go in all sorts of directions. It's basically the same as the original, with tiny changes here and there, which is a good thing. The Neo Geo did receive some games from other developers. Here's Neo Mr. Do. You play as a circus clown who must collect all the fruits to advance to the next stage. You can dig holes and drop heavy objects on enemies similar to Dig Dug. Neo Bomberman is another third-party game. You play as a robot who can drop bombs that explode in a cross shape.
He's not a robot. You may as well tell me next that Final Fight Sodom is a bulky robot freak. Sorry to be the smartass here. Actually, I'm not sorry for being right, nor do I care if I got facts wrong, since I don't do this for money. But, as far as I know, Bomberman is an alien life form that has the ability to spawn explosive matter. Not what the creator wanted, but it's still a decent character concept. I don't hate this game, and unlike average Pojr over here, I can tell you that I like the game's music, but I don't know if it was a wise choice from Hudson Soft to spend a lot of money just to make a Bomberman game that you can easily play elsewhere, since making games for the Neo Geo was also expensive, and also considering the fact that Hudson Soft as a company is no longer around. But that's the thing, if you play one Bomberman game, you probably played them all. It's not a bad game, but I don't think they should have spent a lot of money on another iteration of Bomberman. It also doesn't help they would often reboot the franchise too much. Also, something this average Pojr guy won't tell you with his influencer stuff is to go play Super Bomberman R, because for some reason, neither Konami or these YouTubers can be bothered to promote that online multiplayer game.
Witness the explosive return of Bomberman in its best form.
Looks like it's down to us to save the universe. Brothers, let's go!
This game doesn't show off the Neo Geo's capabilities that much, but it doesn't need to. It's still a good game that deserves a place on this console. Here's Ninja Commando. It's in a top-down perspective, and you must walk north to reach the end of the stage.
Most of these early Neo Geo games just don't look like something the other consoles couldn't do with minor sacrifices and talented developers. Most of the games don't even use the scaling capabilities that much, for example. A far cry from what you get on a less colorful, but more advanced Sega Mega CD game with lots of rotation and scaling effects, while the games in the CD add-on, not being as expensive as a Neo Geo, and a game for it.
If you repeatedly tap the fire button, your firepower will be upgraded. It does make your hand tired though. You can also hold in the fire button to release a more powerful projectile. You die in one hit, but you can collect a barrier weapon that protects the front of your ship. The game takes advantage of the Neo Geo's hardware with well-animated characters and tons of sprites on the screen. This is honestly one of the best looking shoot-'em-ups I've seen. This is definitely one of the games you must play if you want to get into the Neo Geo. There's a lot of fighting games on this console, but King of the Monsters was the most unique one I found. It's in an isometric perspective, and you can freely move around the map instead of being confined horizontally. Unlike other fighting games, you're not only supposed to get their health down, but also pin them. The controls are weird. At the beginning, you're told what the buttons do, but it seems unresponsive when actually playing. I couldn't get my character to jump half the time, and he wouldn't run when I wanted him to. The graphics are decent, but it doesn't look like anything the Super Nintendo couldn't handle. In fact, it was released on it. It's a decent game, but nothing spectacular. Speaking of controls, nearly every Neo Geo game I played has a tutorial mode at the beginning that tells you what each button does. This makes it way easier for newcomers like myself to get into the game, and I'm glad SNK made this a standard. You don't see a lot of older games doing this. Because of the high price tag, the home console version of the Neo Geo was only expected to be a niche item. I mean, who's gonna buy a console for $650? The games were also $200 and higher. But SNK didn't mind the high cost because the games were fully compatible with the arcade version of the Neo Geo, which meant they didn't have to do anything. It's not like they were making games specifically for a dead console. The only real flaw with the Neo Geo, besides the high price, was the increasing popularity of 3D consoles like the N64 and PlayStation. As impressive as the hardware was, the Neo Geo could not produce 3D graphics. SNK released the Neo Geo CD, which was meant to remedy the high production costs of the original console. The CD format meant that games would only cost $80 instead of $200, and the console itself only cost $400 instead of $650. Unfortunately, the loading times were way too excessive, and it came out right before the 3D consoles were released, which the Neo Geo CD couldn't produce. SNK also produced the Hyper Neo Geo 64, which finally did implement 3D rendering, but it ended up being a commercial failure. There were only 7 games released for it, and there was never a home console version. While SNK's attempts to cut costs and stay in the competition were unsuccessful, the original Neo Geo would live on for more than 10 years, with the last official game being released in 2004. If you look at auction sites today, Neo Geos usually go for about $600, sometimes more if there's games included, but there's a surprising new way that you can get one for half the price. There's been a bunch of retro consoles that made a comeback, but they all have some minor pushback. For example, the Atari 2600 Plus delivers the original experience, but the developers chose to use software emulation. This was done as a cost-cutting measure, but some people would have preferred FPGA. Atari probably realizes they need to keep the console affordable because it might turn away customers. An FPGA-based console most definitely would have increased the price by at least double, but would there have been a niche audience if they did it anyway? The team at PlayOn decided to go the more expensive route. Last month, they announced the Neo Geo AES Plus, which takes original cartridges and looks nearly identical to the original. What's the most shocking, though, is the hardware, because they didn't use software emulation or FPGA. They're actually recreating the original hardware, but with support for HDMI. This is a super wild thing to do, and I'm surprised that other companies haven't done this with console remakes. It's also going to be available for a fraction of the price, $250 compared to $650. The company is also making 10 games available for $90 each. If you want to go all in, you can buy the Ultimate Edition, which includes the console, all 10 games, 3 controllers, and a memory card for $1,000. The AES is currently available for pre-order and expected to release in November 2026. The only oddity is that the trailer does not show us the back of the console, so we have no idea what the HDMI port looks like.
I don't think any of this footage matters, because it really looks like an AI-generated video, so I don't think what you say has any value here.
It's most likely meant for a niche audience, which is what the original Neo Geo was meant for. My only complaint is that I'm surprised the regular edition doesn't come with a game, preferably a multi-cart. Atari was nice enough to give us a multi-cart in their collection, but here you have to buy the games a la carte. Am I gonna buy the AES Plus? Probably not. $250 is a great price, but I don't have any Neo Geo games.
Here's an easy solution. You don't need this new shiny piece of retro appeal-inducing plastic. If you have your Mr.
But even those are over $600. Still a good deal though, so that you can play the entire library of games. Unless there's an overwhelming amount of requests for me to cover this, I don't see myself buying it.
Well, I think you should ask money to the people who want you to cover this thing on a video, since I doubt the ad revenue can help you recover the money you would spend on the premium version of this thing. I guess that's why he keeps asking people to subscribe.
Nonetheless, I think the company behind this project made the right call by using original hardware. They could have gone with emulation and dropped the price down, but it wouldn't have appealed to that niche audience. It might have attracted a different audience though, whether that's less or more.
Knowing how people and eBay sellers are, they probably would have bought this anyway. Personally, I think they should have made 2 versions of the console. One of them being cheaper and emulation based. Now let's check average Pojr's Tetris video.
Tetris Forever is a collection of older Tetris games, including the original Electronica 60 version. The game was developed by Digital Eclipse, which is the same company that made Atari 50. In theory, a collection of every Tetris game ever made would be amazing, but does it really have everything? And did Digital Eclipse put as much care into this game as they did with Atari 50? Let's take a look. What's going on? It's Pojr, coming at you with another video. What's going on? It's Pojr, coming at you with another video.
I hate this fucking intro! Fuck you!
I really wanted to thank you all, because my last few videos have actually done pretty well. Let's keep that momentum going. If you're not already subscribed, hit that button right there. With a little bit of help from you, I think we can get to that 50,000 subscribers. We have an amazing community on our Discord server. Just go to discord.pojr.net. We got some great people on there like Phoebe, it's John, Christopher, Grizzly Adam, Hamid, and many more. Okay, let's talk about Tetris Forever. Digital Eclipse has made numerous collections in the past, most notably Atari 50. Not only is the lineup of games nearly perfect, but it's still growing thanks to DLC. You can pull up the instruction manual for every game, and you can view each gameplay variation, which is extremely useful. There's a timeline mode where you can learn about the history of Atari with interviews, artwork, and commercials. They could have stopped at the games, but instead Digital Eclipse went above and beyond. In my opinion, this is the best way to play Atari games. In November of 2024, Digital Eclipse released another compilation of games, but this time based on Tetris. In theory, a collection of every Tetris game ever made would be phenomenal, but is that even possible? I would be surprised, for example, if they could get Nintendo's Tetris on here. Let's see how they did. The first thing I noticed right away is that they reused a design from Atari 50. The colors are slightly different, but the look and spacing is identical. Both collections have a timeline mode, and it looks and works exactly the same. I actually don't like this because it gives the impression that they didn't spend much time on this game, but that's definitely not the case. The timeline mode, despite the design, is still a great way to learn about the history of Tetris. The interviews feature many important people, including the creator of Tetris, Alexei Pajitnov. The interviews are informative, and I learned some things that I didn't know. For example, Tengen secured the license to Tetris by trading away their own game, Blasteroids, to the company Mirrorsoft. Tengen definitely got the better end of the deal there. Some people may not care about the timeline mode and are only buying the collection for the included games, but it's still a nice bonus. Digital Eclipse was able to include every Tetris game from Bulletproof Software and Academy Soft, but is missing some of the more well-known versions. While Nintendo's Tetris is mentioned in the timeline mode, and we even see gameplay footage, neither the NES or Game Boy versions were included as playable games. You might be surprised that Tengen's versions were not included, because isn't Tengen just Atari? Actually, no. Tengen was a different company that operated under the name Atari Games. Despite the similar name, they developed their own lineup of games that had nothing to do with the regular Atari, which is why their version of Tetris wasn't included. If you want to know more, I made a video explaining why Tengen is not Atari. And finally, Sega's version of Tetris was mentioned in the timeline mode, but wasn't included as a playable game.
There is so much wrong here. First of all, I doubt that is the reason why Tengen Tetris is not included. It might have to do with how it was made by people who didn't have the rights to Tetris, and thus nobody knows who has the rights for that version of the game. Another thing about Tengen Tetris is that it's a home port of an arcade game. Secondly, Atari Games was Atari, but only the game development side of it, while Atari Corporation was the part that made the consumer products like the Atari ST line of computers and game consoles. Atari Corporation did make games, but not as much as Atari Games did. The point is, if the company was divided by Warner Communications, then that doesn't make them not Atari, if they started as Atari. The Sega version wasn't included either, but the reason might also have to do with the simple fact that Sega didn't have the rights to Tetris either.
It's unfortunate that Nintendo's Tetris games were not included because they're the most well-known versions, but Digital Eclipse was able to get nearly everything else. Bulletproof Software was behind many of the early Tetris games, as well as the spin-off games like Hatris and Bombliss, all of which were included in this collection. There might not be every version, but let's check out what they did include. Here's a recreation of Alexei Pajitnov's original game on the Electronico 60. The computer couldn't produce raster-style graphics, so the game was created using ASCII art. The core gameplay is nearly identical, except that you don't score points by clearing lines. Instead, you get points for dropping your pieces down to the playfield. The controls have not aged well. You have to repeatedly tap left or right to make the pieces move instead of holding them in. You can make the pieces drop to the bottom, but you can't gradually move them down. If you accidentally press down on the controller, you might make your pieces land somewhere you didn't intend to. It's definitely rough around the edges, but for the sake of completing this collection, I'm glad Digital Eclipse threw this version on here. Using Pajitnov's code, Tetris was ported over to MS-DOS. The graphics are improved, and there's more information on the screen. Because it's a direct port though, the controls have not been improved unfortunately. You still have to tap the button to move the pieces, and there's no way to gradually move pieces down. It's better than the other game because of the graphics alone, but it's still not the ideal version to play today. The developer, Academy Soft, made an updated version with minor improvements. You now have a menu screen where you can customize the game. You can add garbage at the bottom, which is a nice feature. The developers added a phantom mode where some of the pieces are invisible. They should have only made the pieces invisible when they touch the playfield, but instead they're invisible even when you're controlling them. This makes the game way too difficult and unplayable in my opinion. I do think this is an innovative version, but they tried to fix what wasn't broken. Spectrum Holobyte was the first company to publish a Tetris game in the US. It has all the features from the previous version, except for the phantom mode, thank God for that. The graphics are drastically better, and when you complete a level, you get a new background. The controls have still not been improved though. Once again, you have to tap the button to move the pieces, and you can still accidentally drop them in the wrong place by tapping down. The game also starts off way too fast, even on level 0. The graphics, while they're good, there's not much color. Instead, everything looks like a shade of red. The Apple II version came out 6 months later, and is similar to the one we just looked at. The graphics have more color, but are more pixelated and less detailed. The pieces have no texture whatsoever, which makes them more difficult to line up. All the features from the previous release are here too, including the bad controls. I know I've been critical of this, but in reality, these were all early versions of Tetris before a standard had been set. I don't want to hate on the controls too much. The Famicom version is the first Tetris game to be released on a home console. Unfortunately, this game went more backwards than forward. One major improvement though is the addition of music. The previous games didn't have any tracks whatsoever, but this one lets you pick between 3 of them. Unlike the previous games, you have to score 25 lines, and when you do, you advance to the next stage where you start on an empty playfield. You also have lives, which means you can continue if you lose. Unfortunately, the controls are the worst I've seen in any Tetris game. To rotate your pieces, you have to press down on the D-pad, and to drop them, you press the A button. Did they get this backwards? How come pressing down doesn't move the pieces down? That makes more sense. I kept getting confused during my playthrough and would accidentally drop the pieces down when I meant to rotate them. If it weren't for this one issue, I would consider this a decent version, but instead, I think it's the worst one on here.
The worst one on here. That's blasphemy to me. He completely threw out the window what he said about this version having music, but this version is the worst, despite the major music improvement that he mentioned, while also being one of the first versions of the game in adding different kinds of Russian music. These opinions have such low value because they really sound like he didn't spend much time with this version of the game. He was clearly rushing through all versions so he can do these obvious clout chasing videos. That is especially true with the Neo Geo video. But this is the content he wants you to validate him for with a subscription.
Fortunately, you can remap the controls and the settings for all the games. Speaking of which, you do have a lot of ways of customizing the games. You can change the bezels, screen resolution, and scan lines. You can also look at the instruction manuals for the games that have one. This is something that Digital Eclipse got right with Atari 50, so it's no surprise they got it right here too. They tried to put a spin on the Tetris formula with Weltris, but I'm not so sure they were successful. You play in a 3D arena, and you must drop pieces in the center square. Similar to normal Tetris, you must line up pieces vertically or horizontally. If you land any pieces out of bounds, that side will turn red and will be disabled. You lose if all sides turn red, which means you want to avoid putting pieces outside of the center square. The controls are terrible. It's very difficult to move pieces from one side to another, and a few times I placed them in the wrong spot by accident. You can pick a different control scheme where left moves clockwise and right moves counterclockwise, but that comes with its own problems. It's easy to forget which button does what, and I kept moving pieces in the wrong direction. I say stick with regular Tetris. Super Tetris tried to change the formula as well, but this one's actually decent. The game is divided into stages, and you start off with garbage on the screen. Your goal is to clear a majority of the garbage to move on. The rules are exactly the same, but every time you clear lines, you get a bomb piece that lets you destroy some of the tetrominoes. The more lines you score at a time, the larger the bomb piece will be. They made one drastic improvement to the controls. You're now able to gradually move pieces down, which means you're less likely to make mistakes. The only thing I don't like is that you can rotate pieces just by holding in the button instead of trying to tap, which means you might rotate too many times by accident. The graphics are terrible. The playfield is hard to see because it's small, and the pieces look like they were ripped from Minesweeper. The colors blend in, so it's difficult to see where the gaps are. If you turn off the filter though, the game is easier to see. I also wish the developers included the original version of Tetris without the bombs. Some people might have bought this game assuming they were getting the original Tetris, only to be disappointed. Nonetheless, this is actually a nice twist on the usual Tetris formula. Hatris is another heavily modified version of Tetris. Here, you must stack 5 of the same hats in a row to make them disappear. You always control 2 hats at a time, but you can still control one of them if the other one lands. The main challenge is the fact that you can only line up the hats vertically to make them disappear. Sometimes you have to put hats in places that are not ideal, which makes them harder to clear. As you make it further in the game, new style hats will be added, which only makes it more difficult. 3 different versions of the game were included in this collection, which have different advantages. In the Game Boy game, you have a temporary fire upgrade that will clear some of the mess on the screen. In the NES version, you can switch rows with each other, but only a few times. I don't find this ability as useful as the fire upgrade, but I do find that the NES version is easier to play. The Game Boy version has less detailed graphics, which makes it harder to see what you're doing. Regardless of which version you play though, it's one of the best games on here. Tetris 2 plus Bombliss on the NES is an incredible accomplishment. The game has a lot of changes from the original Tetris. You're still supposed to line up rows, but instead of them clearing, the game will check for bombs. If there's any bombs within that row, they will clear a certain radius of the playfield. Unlike normal Tetris, the game is divided into stages, and you only win if you clear the entire playfield. You can also play the puzzle mode, where you have to clear the playfield in the absolute minimum number of turns. You can even create your own level, which adds a ton of replayability to the game. Unlike Super Tetris, the developers had the decency to include the original game. You have the Endless mode, where you have to score as many points as possible, but they didn't stop there. Mode B is like the Famicom Tetris, where you have to clear 25 lines to beat the stage. As you make it further, more garbage will be added to the bottom. Speaking of garbage, in Mode C, you play an endless game of Tetris, but the garbage will be continuously added. I have to compliment the controls. You can rotate the pieces in both directions, and you can gradually move pieces down like in Super Tetris. The tetrominoes move very smoothly in the air because they use a sprite instead of background tiles. This plays arguably better than Nintendo's Tetris, easily one of the best games on this collection. Tetris Time Warp is a brand new game that was made exclusively for this collection. It's a modern game of Tetris, but with one major change. Every time you complete a level, you have an opportunity to warp to an older version of Tetris where you have to complete a challenge. For example, in the Game Boy Tetris, you have to clear a double, and in Bomb Bliss, you have to clear a big bomb. If you succeed in completing these challenges, you gain a huge number of points. There's a few other game modes, like Time Attack, where you have to gain as many points as possible within the time limit. You can also play the 1989 version of Tetris without the Time Warp feature. It's a shame they couldn't include Nintendo's actual version, but this is a nice imitation of it. Even the sound effects are similar. Tetris Time Warp is surprisingly fun, and out of all the games, I spent the most time playing this one. These are only a handful of the games that were included. I think Digital Eclipse did the best they could with the cards they were dealt with. There's no planet where Nintendo would have allowed their versions of Tetris to be on here, but Digital Eclipse did the next best thing and included nearly everything else, and even a brand new game. My only real criticism is how they copy-pasted the same design from Atari 50.
I mostly agree with the praising he gave the rest of the games. Although something he didn't mention is the PC Engine version of Tetris. He did say there is 3 versions of Tetris, but he only focused on the Nintendo versions. It's things like those that make this guy's content feel half-ass. I wouldn't be so critical to him if it wasn't for the fact that this guy asks people to subscribe in literally every single video with his robotic intro, and I haven't even mentioned the membership stuff being locked behind a paywall. Anyways, that's his video on the Tetris collection. I already knew about most of these versions. They didn't even include the Super Nintendo Tetris games. Now I wanna briefly talk about his video on the game Contraforce. I'm not gonna show the video on here, since that would make the video way too long. So I'll mostly recycle what I said about the video on a community post a year ago. It's an okay video overall, putting the usual bad acting aside. However, I noticed he didn't once mention anything about the game's music, or the confusing story. That is probably the way it is due to the game seemingly being translated quickly and therefore, poorly. It might also be because the game was probably in an unfinished state. I was kinda disappointed, because the game has a pretty good soundtrack. It even used the PCM sound channel to have orchestral sounds, assuming you know what those two things are. On top of that, most of the usual problems with this game can easily be solved with both emulation and hacks. Emulation, because that can help you solve the slowdown issue due to the seeming lack of optimization, and hacks, so you can shoot downwards diagonally and maybe correct the poorly translated and confusing story, while adding blood back on one of the seemingly censored graphics for the intro cutscene. However, from what I can tell, there doesn't seem to be any hacks out there for this game, even though it could benefit from it. Also, I have an assumption as to why this game is the way it is. I think the reason the game was cancelled for the Japanese release was because the game wasn't 100% ready by the time the deadline came, so the game got cancelled. But I think someone from the US branch of Konami might have picked the latest prototype or betas of this Arkhound game, and decided to make money out of it by renaming the game Contraforce, since it's a game similar to Contra gameplay wise. And because it's a localized version of an unfinished game, that's why it has slowdown and a nonsense story. I think that's why the game is the way it is, and why it has slowdown issues that the previous Contra games rarely had. Unlike other people, however, I'm still glad that we still managed to get the game. I feel the same way about Ninja Gaiden for the Mega Drive. We would have missed on a pretty good soundtrack if Konami of America didn't give the game a chance. And despite the slowdown issue, I still had fun with this game many years ago. It may not have aliens, but it does have a stage where you are on top of a moving aeroplane, and how you have to go through other planes to progress. Needless to say, I don't agree with Konami or this average JoJo guy not counting this game due to the flaws. It would have still been nice to have this game on the Contra collection with at least the slowdown issue being fixed. That would have been a nice way to legally play the game without having to buy an overly expensive copy of the game by the way, or by committing the serious ROM download crime, or getting a pirated copy of the game. So yes, what a shame these online influencers talking shit about these games prevents us from getting re-releases of certain games. Okay. Now I'm gonna get onto the drama that happened between me and his lame fans on his boring as hell Discord server. I actually asked these guys if they would like to help me fight back that VTuber scammer targeting my channel for saying stuff she doesn't want anybody to know. But all these people bothered to say was, maybe it's all your fault, or, bro I don't give a shit, so I'll look the other way, while you get beaten on the side of the road regardless, if you deserve it or not. They didn't wanna help me in my time of need, so fuck all of them. Except for the guy that didn't go along with the imperialist mob mentality of course. As you can see in the screenshots, they couldn't refute the majority of my points, so of course they had to proceed out by saying, I don't give a shit, and then do more boring talk about consumerism. After all of this, the next day, I was so unsurprised by seeing I got banned from the server. Well good. I'm never gonna apologize for being myself in front of a bunch of boring snowflakes who have proven to me that they wouldn't lift a finger for me, even if it is for a good cause like reporting a vindictive bitch who needs a bunch of people to deal with one man on the internet. Not an army of streamers, but one nobody on the internet. Let that sink in. This is why I often don't ask for help from anybody from someone else's fanbase. Most of the time it goes the same way. They immediately take the easy way out by saying guys are evil and bitches are innocent, and that's the end of the argument. These people don't care about anything. They never help anyone, unless it's a famous YouTuber or a pretty woman. Fuck anybody who does that. I guarantee, if I was more popular, they wouldn't have come up with excuses to not help me fight back malicious users like that VTuber scammer. She filed privacy complaints to silence me about what she does, while conveniently omitting the bad thing she did when she was slandering me on Twitter. You don't do that, unless there is some truth to what I said. I shall show proof, but I don't know if I can do that, since she's targeting my channel and telling people to flag me every time I show the stuff that she did. I'm not kidding. I'm tired of being told excuses. There is far too many people who abuses their choice to not help the small guys or small non-lucrative foundations. I never said I wasn't gonna appreciate the help. Just because you would rather hate me don't mean I deserve to suffer and get silenced and threatened by some bitch who made a big deal over nothing. Yes, I'm calling her a bitch because she acted like one. No respect for some pro-censorship bitch trying to shut me down with mass flags. I myself have never censored anybody by the way, but I always get shit anyway. That's why I hate each and every single one of you. You claim to be decent people, but your greed about subs and your clout chasing behavior says otherwise. Lastly, I wanna show a clip I made for another video, where this average Pojr guy was sucking up to a scummy YouTuber called the quote, immortal John Hancock. That guy doesn't deserve any praise as far as I'm concerned. He couldn't even look straight into the camera for more than 1 second in his quote apology video. That's what matters to me. John Hancock is not the saint that some people like Pojr say he is. 5 years ago, this John guy was caught abusing YouTube's copyright system to censor another user who made a video exposing the shady stuff this John guy was doing. John admitted to be very angry because he knew most of what that guy said was true. When John finally tried to apologize and undo his non-ethical copyright strike, he only did it because a bigger YouTuber called him out on what he did. John's apology video was absolute garbage by the way. He sounded very dishonest, and he could not go 30 seconds without constantly looking around, while not attempting to keep a straight look into the camera. I hate to be the one who has to say this, but that's not how you make a sincere apology. Grown-ass man. And he apparently didn't know how to do that. I'm sure it was just that he didn't want to apologize. But there you go. That is the quote. Good YouTuber that he is.
Games is literally lying about what you're getting, and they took advantage of a good YouTuber. Some people who disliked the product might have blamed John Hancock for it, even though it's not his fault. People who disliked lying about what you're getting, and they took advantage of a good YouTuber. Some people who disliked the product might have blamed John Hancock for it, even though it's not his fault.
So you guys remember those Sega at games clone systems that were just fucking awful? like the worst emulation ever. Like didn't get a single sound effect right. Had tons of slowdown. It was just an awful, awful cheap Chinese knockoff product. Well, for whatever reason, John Hancock made several videos promoting those, and he recommended every single one that At Games made. And I always scratch my head wondering why such a hardcore gamer who knows video games very well would recommend such a shitty product. Well, the dude that runs Top Loaded Gaming did a little digging and found out that John Hancock has an affiliate link to At Games.
So I looked up how to distinguish an Amazon, specifically an Amazon affiliate link, and it basically states that anything that's like tag equals username, that's an affiliate link. So it would appear as though John is making some sort of money from these links. So while he may not necessarily be getting paid money from At Games, you know, for the reviews, he does have this link in his description, and anybody that would purchase based off this link, I would assume that he is making a portion of that. He gets some sort of payment based on that, and he is not disclosing that information.
I mean, like, could you be any more disingenuous? Like, you're gonna straight up lie to all of your fans that adore you and tell them to buy a piece of shit product so you could buy another fucking expensive video game to put on a shelf that you're never gonna touch? Maybe you'll pull it down for a glorified pickups video that you're gonna make even more money off of from Patreon and ad revenue. It's just like this vicious cycle that continues, and
I'm bringing this up because I don't want this to be forgotten. While all that remains is people saying nothing but good things about these YouTubers. You need to consider that when you look at these YouTubers.
They took advantage of a good YouTuber, a good YouTuber, a good YouTuber.
And once again, I don't give a fuck if anybody wants to get angry at the truth.
I'm tired of you motherfuckers thinking that only the people that you like are allowed to talk. I'm the one that's been wronged, but y'all here defending somebody else. That's what's wrong with you motherfuckers. That's why I hate all of y'all. Come on, guys. I added 7 dislikes. I added 12. I need to go make some more troll accounts so I can add some more. You don't know none of these people, but you run around the internet doing their dirty work for them. Fuck y'all. Don't come to my channel with that shit. Because my answer is fuck each and every one of y'all. Every second of every day for an entire lifetime. And any of you people come and say, oh, he's just whining about being flagged. Go to all the channels of everybody else who done been flagged. Go to all those channels and say the same thing to them. Tell all them to shut up. Because you ain't going to come and tell me to shut up when the shit happens to me. But when it happens to them, y'all all in support. Oh, we love you. Here's some money. Why is the standard always change for people that you like versus people that you don't? I thought everybody was supposed to get treated fairly. I thought it's supposed to be equal treatment under the law. If you can't handle what's being said on this website, don't be here.